Okay, let's go ahead and get cranked up. All right. All right, we got all the technical.
Looks like you guys are good to go.
Beautiful, wonderful. All right, well, good afternoon, everybody. It is 5:06 on Monday, the 27th of November, 2023, the Monday after Thanksgiving, and everybody seems to be standing up and survived the long holiday weekend. And Councilmember Bowden, I'm going to call on you, if you don't mind, sir, to lead us in an invocation.
Not at all. And I'm just gonna ask everybody to observe a moment of silence. We've recently been talking about what's happening in Israel, and I think it'd be good for everybody to stop and reflect on the fact that some progress seems to be made on bringing those hostages home to safety and their families. So let's pray for continued steps towards peace. Amen.
Amen. Yeah,
And
we have a lot to
Mr.
be
Chairman,
thankful
the mayor
for.
did just join.
I see, Mr. Mayor. All right, everybody. We're just getting cranked out, Mr. Mayor. We just did the invocation. Approval of the November 13th, 2023 minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Any corrections, additions, modifications, or edits? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Going down to item number E, Mr. O'Brien, do you want to?
Sir, yes, sir, Mr. Chade. This is Hayes Park. We're asking for these streets in Hayes Park to be entered into the city's maintenance system. They've all been constructed and inspected, and we recommend that they be added into the city system.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. The next item is item F on temporary encroachments.
Yes, sir. We have those two items. That's for information only. We have a fence and we also have a right angle sign. All have been inspected and approved and recommended for the encroachments to be allowed.
I will note that the item on number F2 is at the office building I occupy on the third floor, Minnow, and it is a young person's, a children's bathing suit shop. So I find it quite incredible. They're so specialized that they're selling juvenile swimwear. So we hope they have a lot of success. By the way, if you haven't been by 145 King Street, they redid all of those storefront on the King Street and Queen Street side, and it really looks wonderful, the improvements they have on that. So do we need a motion to approve that, Mr. O'Brien?
No, sir. It's for information only.
Okay, that's what I thought. Very good. All right. Then on an update on environmental services.
Yes, sir. We are happy to report that we're all routes are on time. We're out there busy today after the holiday, but I talked to Matt just a little bit ago, and he thought we'd be able to finish everything today. And then what we didn't get, we get first thing in the morning. So we're in pretty good shape with that.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. O'Brien? Yes, sir. Councilmember Bowden.
Not a question. I just want to commend y'all for the app. I mean, it's been helpful for me, and I can't tell you how many like texts and just conversations I've had that people are just so happy with something that small that makes such a positive impact on just their daily routines. So
the reaction, Councilmember, the reaction has been tremendous. I appreciate you saying that. We're really happy with it, and actually we're in the process. We got some door hangers that have come in, and we'll be putting those out on the citizens' doors. So hopefully we're going to continue to get more response from it. But it's been great, and people are using it, and we're very happy with it. So thank you for bringing that up.
I mean, I can tell you I had no idea my recycling was going to be collected on Saturday until I got that notification. So thank you. That was mostly a personal thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Which is the county's responsibility, not the city's responsibility.
Hey, we're solving their problems too.
Hey, well, If I just get them to replace my receptacle on from the county, I'd be happy. By the way, I had to give a big shout out to Matt as well, Mr. O'Brien, on getting those emails out to us early about the Christmas tree collections and the holiday schedule. I've been forwarding those out to my constituents, and they very much appreciate all the events notice on the schedule for that. So thanks for
We'll
that as well.
continue to send those out. Yes, sir, Mr. Shea, just to let people remember and remind us the holidays go forward.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions for Mr. O'Brien about environmental services? Okay. Tom, are you going to hang around a little bit longer, or are you signing off?
No, sir, I'll be here. I'm gonna take my picture off, but I will be here and be around for the whole meeting.
I may have one thing to bring up to you at the
Yes, sir.
following
I'll be
our
here.
stormwater update.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Fountain.
Thank you, Councilman Shade. So item H1 is the brick arch upfits. This is recommending approval of an increase in the annual task order contract maximum. So this is a renewal of a contract, but increasing the maximum not to exceed amount within the task order contract. Task order contracts are what we refer to as the indefinite delivery contracts, where there are negotiated or low bid, technically, line items of typical work, in this case related to cleaning brick arches, and then we can issue individual task orders for work as it occurs or as needed to occur in the city. So this is the last year of the one original year and then 3 one-year renewals for Sanders Brothers Construction for cleaning of the arches, with an increase from $500,000 to $750,000 based on the change to the council procurement ordinance that allows those task order contracts to go up to $750,000 with a single vendor.
So we need approval to extend the contract maximum up to $750,000.
That's correct.
So moved.
I move for approval.
All right, we have a motion for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, well, call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. This is, Mr. Mayor, I think this is sort of part of that ongoing maintenance that has been initiated, and this is like a found jewel to help with stormwater maintenance. And it sounds pretty expensive overall, but really it's a great deal when we're getting to have this available to us. So thanks, Matt, for your stewardship of all of this. The next item for discussion is a recommended potential update to the city floodplain ordinance.
Yeah, thank you, Councilman. So we had briefly touched on this at the last meeting, but it was very late in the evening at that point. I think there had been a request to bring it back when we were all a little bit fresher. I focused on just 3 of the recommended updates at this point. And again, this is not the ordinance. This is just the concept of what we would write an ordinance to accomplish. I'm going to go through just those 3 primary needs. We have a recommendation in an ordinance update to make our ordinance match more of a model ordinance, which is more of a straightforward approach to doing floodplain management, cleaner definitions, better tied to the National Flood Insurance. But that doesn't change much of how we regulate or what we do. It's just the language there within. These are 3 slides, each one of which is an actual change to the way we regulate. I'm going to walk through right now is what our recommendations are from the department. The first item, I think, is a relatively popular item. It is related to substantial improvement or substantial damage. So we currently regulate for a 5-year cumulative, and I'm going to talk about what that is in a second. And we're recommending a change to a 1-year cumulative. So what happens right now in our current ordinance, the second paragraph, if your structure takes improvement or if you improve your structure, or if your structure is damaged in a storm and you need permits to do repair, we have to look at a 5-year period. So you got to take this damage, this repair, and go back 5 years, add up any work that you've done, permitted work on your structure, compare that to the value of your structure now. And if you are over 50%, you've got to bring that structure fully into compliance with the current floodplain rules, which sometimes involves elevating your structure or doing some other things to it. What has happened in a lot of situations is that we have had people who have purchased a home not fully realizing that the prior owner had either done major upfitting work with permits or had damage in prior storm events. And then they will get damage, or they will come in for a permit and they will have challenges because of how far back this reaches with making that work. And the intent from the National Flood Insurance Program is trying to say, look, if homes are being repetitively damaged, you should make them more resistant to future damage. The challenge is that the cost of making a home more resistant can be very, 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 very high. If you have a slab on grade home, it can be demolishing the home and rebuilding the home. It can also be tricky in our area because frequently, as we talked about, with how often the homes are being sold, you'll see people just spending a lot of money on interior renovations for their home with no damage. And then they'll have a relatively minor damage event in a hurricane, like having a roof replacement or something like that, that could push them over that 50% threshold and suddenly require them to elevate the home, even though the time to do that really would have been under the flipping or the improvement permits, right? Not under a roof replacement. So what we're proposing to do is to shift the requirements to a single year to a 12-month cumulative period. So if you have damage or you have an improvement, instead of looking back 5 years and adding all those time periods together, you're going to look back just 12 months, 1 year, and add those improvements together. So you're really only looking at that one hurricane season cycle. You're looking at one set of improvements. It's still 12 months cumulative, so you can't come in to like renovate your kitchen, then your bathroom, then your living room, then then do a new roof, then and try to break it up into separate permits to avoid the requirements. Like that's not the intent, right? That's something that NFIP is very big on preventing people from doing. But it does provide a shorter clock where you're less likely to get kind of caught in an unexpected trap when someone buys a new home or something else along those lines. There is a slight reduction in the number of credits we get towards insurance discounts from doing this, but it's a relatively minor reduction and it would not change the city's current level of insurance savings that we pass on, or that we are eligible for all of our residents to get, our property owners to get when they purchase insurance. So it's not technically worth a lot of points. It obviously is taking away a tool to force people to improve their own properties up and out of the floodplain. But again, our recommendation is that that's worthwhile with the risk to especially lower income homeowners with having a property that saw substantial improvement or saw major improvements and then is sold, and in the next year has something like a roof replacement from a storm event that kind of trips someone into this requirement. So any questions on this one? I know it's relatively confusing because of this cumulative aspect, but I think this is one that everyone would feel good about from not trapping property owners. There is, of course, the downside that you're not forcing homes to elevate over time, which makes the city more resilient in the long run.
All right, I saw Councilmember Appel had his hand up first, and I saw Councilmember Ballard. Councilmember Appel, you had a question?
Thank you, Councilman Shade. And Matt, you answered my original question, which was what the impact of this would be to our rating with the National Flood Insurance Program. So that's good to know that it's going to just be a minor adjustment that's not going to cause us to lose our current classification. My new question is whether or not there was any consideration to setting this rule up along the lines of like the assessed value of the property. In other words, it seems to me that this policy would really help folks on the lower socioeconomic level, right? Because this can get very complicated to have to bring things into compliance, over a 5-year period. But if somebody buys an $8 million house on the Battery, to me, that's a much less sympathetic case. And those are the folks that we probably ought to, require them to, take more corrective action over time. I just wonder if there had been any thought to maybe having the rule pegged to some sort of assessed value calculation, appraised value calculation, something along those lines.
I just remember when we were talking about this, it may have been a different subject. but it's about the value of the property. The question became along the lines of, do you include the dirt as part of the value of that? And so it's a good point to bring up, Councilmember Rappel, as to how do we calculate that value? And I think Matt was about to say something in that regard, and I cut him off. So Matt, did you want to pick back up on that?
That's okay, Councilman Shade. So the value calculation is, we will clear up the definitions of that in the ordinance as well, but FEMA does not allow you to use anything except the structure. There are different ways you can calculate the value of the structure, one of which is the tax assessment, or the tax appraisal value, which is sometimes different than the assessment value. You can also get it, you can order an actual appraisal. There's a way to do it off of like a cash value replacement with the depreciation calculation from an insurance policy, but it is only the structure itself. They don't let you use the property, the underlying property value. And the thought is that, getting back to the cost to elevate the home, is based on the cost of the structure itself and the damage to the structure rather than that property. And there is a good question, Councilman Pell, from, we have not looked at it from a like valuation threshold or a tiering of some sort, where we regulate differently based on value or cost of the home. Generally, the more expensive homes, it's harder to get the level of damage where you trigger the requirement, because the homes are so, the dollars per square foot are so high on a lot of the downtown homes, where you're up in $400 or $500 a square foot frequently, that you need such incredible damage to trigger that level versus the value of the property, that we're actually really seeing more voluntary raising of homes downtown, as people are just sick of their home flooding and have the resources to be able to elevate and spend the couple $100,000 that it frequently is to elevate those older homes or more. And I think we've done a lot of work, as has Historic Charleston Foundation and the BAR, of trying to find ways to make that possible and not damage the historic integrity of the home, because that's an important aspect. And we'll talk about in a minute, there actually is a separate historic variance process that NFIP has if your home if it would damage the historic character of the property in order to elevate it, for instance, like on a streetscape or something like that. There is a question, though, in some of the residential neighborhoods, especially as you move out of the historic district, on some of the higher value, if that would be something to consider. We did not at this point look at that. We did leave it as a across the board regulation. I'd have to talk a little bit with legal to see how that would work and what our allowances would be, but we can certainly talk to them and see if there's any route for that.
Councilmember Bowden, you have your hand up.
So I would love to see an ordinance on this, and that's I think where I would like to go with this. But just so I understand, if I was to, let's say I put an addition onto the back of my house today, and then in July there was a hurricane that caused, significant damage. Is there a way to separate what I have done, voluntarily to, simply make my house more marketable or more livable for my own personal reasons, from the damage that, was only somewhat foreseeable?
Not under the NFIP, not in order for the city to participate in that national flood insurance program.
Okay, fair enough.
And that is exactly the challenge with this, right? Is one of it is doing education and making sure people understand when they're doing major projects what the risks are, because as you mentioned, most people do not understand that risk. Some of the contractors do, but not necessarily the homeowners. And then currently, it's not just if you had improvement right now and then had a storm in July. It would be if you did an improvement this year, if there was a storm over the next 4 Julys. So we're trying to at least bring that down to a tighter period, because it certainly increases the risk of you also needing to as we talked about, like replace a roof that you hadn't expected, or an HVAC system, or something else that is just an unexpected repair, not necessarily related to damage.
So, Councilman Bowden, if you did your addition in 2018, and then you had a storm occur in 2023, you could be counted for the improvements that you did in 2018, because that's within the 5-year period. But
Right. And
but
in
if
this,
if you
I mean,
in this rule, whichever you did in 2018 won't count towards this value.
okay. And that's the answer that I thought I was going to hear. And I was just interested in whether there was any wiggle room there. But I mean, to me, this is a drastic improvement for people who, frankly, are not watching every one of our meetings on YouTube, because why would they? They trust us to make.
Come on, this
these
is riveting
decisions.
discussion. Come on.
No, it just, the 5-year total seems to lead to more unreasonable results for those people who are not insane in watch our meetings. With all due
I
respect.
probably should have clarified, Councilman Bowden, that this is probably my mistake. I'm just so used to talking about these over the last few years that you have to have a substantial improvement, substantial damage requirement that basically uses some methodology to prevent people from breaking permits into multiple permits to avoid the 50% rule, which is what this all falls into. The city had chosen to go to a full 5 years, 8 or 9 years ago, when they first implemented this for the additional CRS credits and some of the protection. So we can't eliminate it at all completely with the way NFIP is set up. What we're proposing is kind of taking it back to a more reasonable way to catch those permits, in our opinion. Because like you're talking about, at least if you do an addition, you did the addition. If you purchase a new home, if you're an incredibly careful due diligence purchaser, you may have gone through looking at permits and things that have been pulled on your home and understanding what had been accomplished. And mentally, you may even look at the house and say, oh, this looks really nice. Someone must have done some work on it recently. But that most people don't necessarily understand that there may have been a permit 3 years before they purchased the house to do an addition. And then they have damage. Like, you don't even realize what the liability basically that you're purchasing when you buy a home that's had major improvements prior to your ownership.
Sure. So that leads to one interesting point that I'll shut up after this, but is there any, disclosure requirement if you've done something within the past, let's say 6 months, a year? I know there's not if you've just chosen to do that on your own, but under these rules, is there any special disclosure requirement to purchasers? And if not, is something like that possible to do under state law if the legislature chose to do that?
So the city building permits are available on the city permitting website. If you go, anyone can go see what work has been done on a home. In terms of damage, that is a very new disclosure rule that South Carolina did pass, where you have to disclose at least knowledge of flood damage or issues with your home. I mean, you can still get into an issue where someone fails to disclose, but there's at least a legal route there to have some liability. That is a relatively new rule that the state put through that does help. I mean, there is now knowledge of flood damage and knowledge of flooding issues, as well as some other items that got changed, I think, within the last year or so.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Mayor has his hand up, and Mr. Mayor.
Well, thank you, council member. And I just wanted to point out, but then Matt kind of beat me to the punch in his just prior remarks about the difficulties that you can encounter when you have to go back 5 years with different ownership, whether the homeowner actually got a permit or not, and making sure that we have an accurate record of that 5-year history. It becomes difficult and challenging. So I would just commend this change to my colleagues for that reason alone, as long as Matt, the CRS impact, the number of points or whatever, is minimal, then this would make it a lot easier for homeowners, in my opinion, would make it easier for the city in just keeping track of all this. And I think in effect, it basically limits the total coming up to requirements to true catastrophic and true serious damage on a property, as opposed to, something smaller. So I think it's a good change. Just wanted to share that opinion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad we postponed this discussion until today, because we were getting a little fatigued at the last meeting, and my initial gut reaction was I didn't think this was a good idea, but after just chewing on it for a few seconds, it really is a fairness issue for the reasons that the mayor has just pointed out, and the other reasons that we've been discussing. And if it doesn't do any violence to our points, our credit point, this is going to be a whole lot easier to manage from Matt's department and in the building permitting department. I just see a whole host of positive results coming out of this. Let's think about the fairness part of it from, like the mayor pointed out, someone did some improvements that were unpermitted back 3 years ago, and an innocent home buyer comes in, storm occurs, the damage, and they find out, well, wait a minute, now it's over the 50% rule based on this 5-year standard. That homeowner is stuck unfairly and unknowingly. So I agree with the mayor. We need to get behind this and get this passed. Okay, we're not taking any action on this right tonight, are we, Matt? This is just discussion purposes. Was there another component we need to discuss, or?
There are two other items. I
Okay.
think they're a little more straightforward than this one. This is probably the most complicated, even though I think it's a popular. It would be generally popular. I mean, again, there's always a downside, but I think generally popular. The second item, this one I think is relatively straightforward. I always hesitate to say that, but the city currently has a freeboard requirement, which is how many feet you have to build above the absolute minimum FEMA base flood elevation. So right now, for new residential construction, new commercial construction, and then substantial improvement or damage of commercial construction, your finished floor elevation has to be 2 feet above the minimum FEMA level. And that's something FEMA is incredibly strongly supporting and pushing in communities, because there's always, one, the chance that their maps are wrong, and that they're off by a foot, and that way your home still doesn't flood. And then two, they're concerned, as everybody is, about sea level rise and intensifying storms, that we might build you a home, and then in 10 or 15 years, that map might get revised, and suddenly your home now is back in the flood zone, and you have to pay a much higher insurance rate, and you're a much higher risk of damage. So the idea is this very minor cost to build it a little higher in the first place is strongly worthwhile. The city has that freeboard in place already, 2 feet for new residential, new commercial, and substantial improvement or damage of commercial. We have a 1 foot for substantial improvement of residential. Residential, if you basically took that damage or did that renovation, you only have to go 1 foot above base flood elevation. There is a change in some of FEMA's rules to say that freeboard requirement needs to specifically include equipment and machinery on the home, not just the finished floor elevation. That is how the city has a policy right now that we regulate. We just need to clean up the ordinance and make it extremely clear in the ordinance from a CRS credit perspective that is what we're doing. Equipment, machinery generally is things like your HVAC system, electrical system, ductwork, anything that could be flood damaged basically needs to be at that same level of protection. The reason that this matters, again, is that FEMA has put in a new, the NFIP has put in a new prerequisite for being a class 8, you have to have that freeboard requirement include your machinery and equipment. So for everyone's perspective, a class 10 is no insurance discounts. Each class you go better than that, you get an extra 5% discount on your policy. So they're saying to go above class 9, you have to have this in place. So currently the city's a class 6. We get a 20% discount on our policies. If you didn't do this, you'd go back to a 5% discount. So everyone's price would go up basically 15% on their flood insurance for something we're already doing. We just need to change the ordinance and say, yes, this is required. And you'll notice when you drive by homes, especially new homes, you know, the outside condenser unit on the HVAC system is like on a little wooden platform, or that's the most common thing you'll see. If you're putting in ductwork, the ductwork normally now goes in the attic rather than in the crawl space under the home. You can still put stuff in the crawl space, it just can't be flood damageable. So as long as your items down there are watertight, it's allowed. But this is something that it's a pretty straightforward ordinance change. It's the way we're already doing policy. I don't think there'll be any issues with builders or anything. It just needs to get done for that prerequisite. Any questions on that one?
Anybody have any questions? Councilman Bowden?
I mean, I think you covered it, but just worst case scenario, I mean, this is a pretty cheap fix.
So it's not on, it's only on, you know, if you have a new home or you were to install a new HVAC system or you were to install something new, right? It wouldn't make people go back and retrofit their existing property without a trigger. It would just be, if you were to say replace your, you know, your air conditioner, your outside unit, and you didn't currently have a platform, you still have to remember, you still have to be at base flood elevation for all this stuff, no matter what, under the FEMA rules. But you might have to come back and build that platform a foot higher or 2 foot higher when you installed your new system, which is what you should be doing anyway from a protection perspective. Because if you're going to go spend $10,000 on a new air conditioning unit, let's not have it get flooded the first time that we get a big storm that rolls through. So yes, there's no like clawback provision. It doesn't go in and tell people if you've got an existing home, you're going to have to go rip all your ductwork out and build it. That only time that triggers is if you hit that substantial improvement, substantial damage threshold we talked about at the top, where then you have to bring your whole house into compliance. You'd have to now bring it into a slightly higher level of compliance with that machinery and equipment. Or if you were to go install new ductwork, you would no longer be able, I mean, again, this is how we're already regulating. It would just be, it's just a clarification that that's what you're going to have to do by the ordinance. We already do this by policy.
Any questions for Matt? Matt, I'll just, from a personal experience, I had a townhouse on Trapman Street. And after one storm event, I elevated the outdoor HVAC system to a level I thought was high enough. Then the next year, another storm came and I had to go up another couple of feet. It kept on having to go higher and higher. So finally, I just said, "To hell with it." I went as high as I could go. That was allowed, just to make sure that I was out of that. What happens in the event that with some of these structures, you don't have the ability to put it in an attic? There's not space for that. If your insulation or ductwork is underneath the house and you don't have that structure option to go in an attic, what do you do then?
Yeah, so you have an option to try to build it in a way, and it says kind of at the bottom here that they can be designed so that floodwaters can't infiltrate or accumulate within the components of the system. So you'll see that sometimes if someone has like an electrical outlet or lighting that's lower on an elevated home, you can install it with like GFCI outlets and make sure the conduits are encased. It's a little harder to do that with crawl spaces, but sometimes you'll see people encapsulate the ductwork so that if it gets wet, it isn't damaged at all. It doesn't have to be replaced. If it's a historic home, there's an option for a variance potentially if there's nowhere else to put it. So there are some routes, but it can get a little bit tricky.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's in our current setup as well. That's part of the reason that substantial improvement, substantial damage can be so difficult.
Very good. Any further questions or discussions on this proposed change? Then I think Matt's got one more, right?
This is the last one. This is just so as I mentioned, there's a separate process. If you have a historic home, you're able to go in for a potentially through a variance process with one of our building boards, where you explain how you're doing like the maximum amount of protection you can do without damaging the historic nature of the property. And there's a process for that, and you have to demonstrate it to the board. But in order to be eligible for that process under our current regulation, your structure has to either have been determined by SHPO, by the State Historic Preservation Office, or to be a historic structure, or you have to be individually listed in the National Historic Register on your property. There is an option in the way the NFIP and the FEMA insurance programs work, where the city, if it's a recognized basically historic entity by the state, which we are, like a historic regulatory entity, we also can list structures on a locally kept list as historic and make that determination ourselves in addition to the state or the national government doing it. I think with the effort that our city puts into historic preservation, it would make sense to give this option. It doesn't require the city to do it. The city doesn't have to list them locally, but it gives them the option if we feel a property is listed locally, rather than what currently happens is if we have a major hurricane that comes through and does damage, we have to go put together a package for SHPO to review of every property that we as a city think may be a historic property. If you're familiar with downtown, there's a number of National Historic districts downtown, but not necessarily, those properties aren't necessarily individually listed just because they're in a district. So you still have to go back and talk to SHPO about, are those properties important to that district being a recognizable district, and basically go through this long, very drawn out process that is quite a large paperwork burden. It wouldn't normally be a problem, except when you're at the end of a hurricane and you might have 100 homes or 50 homes that need to go through that determination process. So this gives the city the option, if it ever wanted to do an inventory or do a list and keep that local list in addition to the state and federal lists. I think this is beneficial to have that flexibility in the ordinance. It's not something we're required to do, but it's something we wanted to get any opinions or strong feelings from the committee on before we draft up. It's a very easy piece of ordinance language. It's not hard to add, but it's not necessarily all advantages or disadvantages, just some flexibility.
Okay. Anybody have any questions on this component? Now, this just makes just common sense. You talk about a government entity making the determination if it's historic or not. I mean, and what better government entity than the city of Charleston to determine if it's historic or not based on our prior history and experience in doing that already. So this seems like a no-brainer as well.
It's supposed to make a lower regulatory burden on the city for doing this kind of work. I mean, obviously the city would still have to have a process and make sure it follows its process in order for that to be a possibility. But I think it's a good route.
Very good presentation, Matt. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Fountain while we have him here on those three components that we just discussed?
And Councilman, the next step will be working through that draft ordinance, and we'll bring the ordinance back to the Public Works Utilities Committee for review and consideration. We will talk to some outside stakeholder groups about it as well, to see if there's any strong opinions about the way we're writing it. And we'll try to do a full cleanup and then identify the changes, the significant changes we made as part of that cleanup.
Very good. All right, I don't see any hands up. We can move on to item I1. Update on abandonment of a portion of 6th Avenue and Dunman Street.
Yes, thank you, Councilman. So after Matt has drained all the life out of you at this point, I come bearing good news. I'm taking something off your plate. After our request for a public hearing on the abandonment of 6th Avenue at Dunman, near the Citadel campus, we learned after a discussion with CWS that this actually was done by council on March 12th of 1985. So this section of roadway has already been abandoned and a portion of it has been deeded to one adjacent property owner. So we just need to technically finish the deal and draft one more quick claim deed to the neighboring adjacent property owner. So I just wanted to give you guys a heads up. I've already spoken with Councilman Gregory. This is in his district. He's aware, and he's actually participating in a neighborhood meeting tonight, sharing the same news that I'm sharing with you right now. So that's all I have for you. No action necessary.
Very good. And I see that Mark Brandenburg is on the line. I think he wanted to give us an update on, and Mark, I'm sorry to get back in touch with you, but my hearing, then my drive back from Monk's Corner.
No worries.
But we did text one another. So you want to just give us an update on the property swap, I guess, at College Park near the dog park and the parking lot. So there was some discussion about a reverter clause.
Yeah, y'all had asked, and I think it was some of the folks that are on this meeting. Y'all had asked about inserting a reverter clause into the assignment that the city is supposed to give to the Citadel. If you remember, there's a land transfer agreement from 1994. Under that agreement, the city got what is now Riley Park. The Citadel got College Park. The deed to College Park includes a very broad reverter clause that just says if it's not used for school or state of South Carolina purposes, then it reverts back to the city of Charleston. That's College Park. The other part of that agreement says that the city would assign its lease with that it had with SCE&G for the parking lot right next to College Park. They would assign that parking lot, that lease to the Citadel. And so in y'all's meeting a couple of weeks ago, you said, well, could there be a reverter clause included in that assignment? That to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense because, SCE&G, now Dominion, can revoke that clause, that lease at any time. We don't have any control over it. Y'all don't have any control over it. But even if you would include something like that, like I said, that clause on the reverter clause on College Park is very broad. I don't see us ever running afoul of it. So those are just my thoughts as the school's lawyer.
And Councilman, thank you, Mark. Councilman Shea, just so you know, the staff is seeking a deferral on second reading on this tomorrow night because we've got some other things we got to work out with Dominion, and I briefed Mark on that earlier today, just so you know. So we're still talking.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for that update on that. And so we're going to defer this anyhow, unless anybody on the committee has further questions regarding that. And the mayor shaking his head no, and I don't see any appetite from anybody else as well. Okay, we'll circle back with you. I'm sure Julia will be back in touch with you, Mark. But
okay.
Before we
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Good to see all of y'all. We'll go on to our next debacle over here. How about that?
Okay, have fun. Tom, I wanted to just keep you on for one quick question.
Yes, sir.
I am so excited about the work that the county is initiating over next to the new county park by Charlestown Landing off of Old Town Road. But in the process of doing that, after all that wonderful work that the highway department did on making repairs and improvements to the sidewalk on Old Town, this work has blocked sidewalk, and the sidewalk is closed on that section of Old Town Road between the fire station and the entrance to Charlestown Landing. And there's no alternative. There's no place across the street to avoid that. It sort of kills anybody who's trying to walk or bike or jog in that area. You have to go into the grassy area, which is very complicated and cumbersome to do. Is there any way you could make contact with your friends, with the state or the county to see if they can do something so that the construction trucks that are going in and out of the new construction zone can keep that sidewalk somehow open some way? It's just a major inconvenience because that really is a very heavily traveled component of, every very heavily traveled portion of the sidewalk between West Pawnee neighborhood and folks who are heading north towards the North Bridge. a lot of
So
joggers.
I'll give them a call tomorrow and I'll report back to you, let you know what we find out.
That would be wonderful if you could do that. Sorry to keep you on for that one issue, Tom, but I thought I saw the public service department update that sort of triggered me. I made a note of that to ask you about that as well. All right. Anybody else have any questions, input, comments, suggestions? Brooke, I have to tell you that as you walked over to your coat rack, from a distance, that looked like a bear. Your coat and your scarf over there had an image of a bear. I said, does Rick have a stuffed bear in his office now?
It's the city zoo.
I remember those days at
Hee-haw,
the
hee-haw.
the city zoo. All right, everybody. Thank you all very much for your patience.
Thank
We
y'all.
actually got a lot of accomplished within the hour, and I will see hopefully everybody tomorrow at city council meeting. Y'all have a good evening.